Standing outside the glass conference room on my 32nd birthday, I watched Derek shuffle through termination papers with the same casual indifference he used to order his morning coffee. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows across his face as he looked up and gestured for me to enter. My colleagues pretended to focus on their computer screens, but I felt their curious glances burning into my back as I walked toward what I knew would be the most satisfying conversation of my professional life. Derek's thin smile stretched across his angular features as I settled into the chair across from him, my purse containing months of carefully documented evidence resting calmly in my lap. He cleared his throat and leaned forward with theatrical importance. "Michelle, I'm going to cut straight to the chase. Consider this a birthday gift, you're fired." My hands trembled slightly, but I smiled back at him, knowing that Human Resources had already received every screenshot, every recorded conversation, and every piece of proof I'd been collecting for the past 6 months. 6 months earlier, I'd been nothing more than a dedicated marketing analyst at TechFlow Innovations, a mid-sized software company nestled in downtown Portland. My cubicle sat in the middle of a bustling open floor plan where 20-something programmers debated code over energy drinks and seasoned sales representatives worked their magic over headsets. Derek Hamilton had been my supervisor for 8 months when I first noticed something wasn't quite right. It started with small things. During our quarterly review meeting in March, Derek presented my comprehensive social media campaign strategy to the senior management team as if he'd conceived every innovative detail himself. I sat in the back of the conference room, watching him gesture enthusiastically at the slides I'd spent weeks perfecting, using phrases I'd written and statistics I'd researched. When our CEO, Patricia Walsh, praised the brilliant approach to targeting millennial consumers, Derek accepted the accolades with practiced humility. "Thank you, Patricia. I really believe this multi-platform approach will revolutionize how we connect with our demographic," he said, smoothing his expensive tie. My stomach churned as I listened to him claim credit for my late nights analyzing consumer behavior patterns and my breakthrough insight about leveraging micro-influencers in niche markets. But when I mentioned it to my colleague James Rodriguez after the meeting, he laughed it off. "Come on, Michelle. Derek probably just forgot to mention your contributions. You're being paranoid," James said, unwrapping his sandwich in the break room. "Supervisors present teamwork all the time. It's not personal." But it felt personal when Derek started taking my weekly reports and presenting them verbatim to upper management without acknowledgement. It felt personal when he began scheduling one-on-one meetings with our biggest clients using talking points I'd developed. And it definitely felt personal when I overheard him telling the VP of Sales that he'd single-handedly increased our engagement rates by 43%. The breaking point came during a board presentation in late April. Derek stood at the front of the mahogany-paneled boardroom, clicking through a presentation that showcased my innovative cross-platform marketing strategy. Every graph, every compelling statistic, every creative element had emerged from my research and analysis. Yet Derek described each component as his own brainchild, speaking with confident authority about decisions I'd made and campaigns I'd designed. The key insight here, Derek explained to the board members, was recognizing that our target demographic responds more strongly to authentic storytelling than traditional advertising approaches. By implementing this strategic shift, we've seen unprecedented engagement across all channels. I knew that moment would haunt me forever if I didn't take action. That evening, I drove home to my small apartment overlooking the Willamette River and made a decision that would change everything. Sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open and a cup of chamomile tea growing cold beside me, I began documenting every instance of Derek's intellectual theft. I started with a simple spreadsheet listing dates, meetings, and stolen ideas. Then I began saving emails, taking screenshots of internal documents, and keeping detailed notes about every interaction. I researched company policies about intellectual property and discovered that TechFlow had strict guidelines about giving credit for innovative contributions. My investigation revealed that Derek's pattern went far beyond simple oversight. He systematically reviewed my work, identified the most valuable elements, and presented them as his own original thinking. When I analyzed 6 months of his presentations, I found that 68% of his supposedly original content came directly from my research and recommendations. Sandra Peterson from Human Resources had always seemed approachable during company social events, but I wasn't sure whether she could be trusted with something this sensitive. Derek had cultivated relationships throughout the company, and I didn't know how deep his influence extended. I needed to be absolutely certain about my evidence before making any accusations. The climactic moment of this period came when I discovered Derek's most audacious theft yet. While working late one Thursday evening, I accessed the shared server to retrieve some files and stumbled across a folder containing Derek's correspondence with other department heads. In those emails, he explicitly claimed responsibility for strategies I'd developed and dismissively referred to my actual contributions as minor support work. One email to the marketing director made my blood run cold. Michelle has been struggling to keep up with the demands of our evolving strategy. She's become increasingly difficult to work with and seems to resent the innovative approaches I've been implementing. I'm concerned about her ability to adapt to our new direction. Reading those words felt like a punch to my stomach. Derek wasn't just stealing my work, he was actively undermining my reputation to cover his tracks. That night, I realized this wasn't just about getting credit for my ideas. This was about my entire career and professional integrity. The discovery of Derek's character assassination campaign transformed my documentation from casual record-keeping into a full-scale investigation. I approached my evidence collection with the methodical precision of a detective building a case, knowing that any accusation I made would need to be absolutely bulletproof. My first breakthrough came through an unexpected source. Rachel Martinez from accounting struck up a conversation with me during our monthly safety training meeting, and somehow our discussion drifted toward work frustrations. Rachel mentioned that she'd been puzzled by some of Derek's expense report submissions, particularly his frequent claims for client entertainment at expensive restaurants. "I probably shouldn't mention this," Rachel said, glancing around the empty training room. "But some of Derek's receipts don't add up. He's been billing dinners for 4 people at places like Le Bernardin and claiming they're client meetings, but when I cross-referenced the dates with our client database, those clients were out of town or had no scheduled meetings." This revelation opened an entirely new dimension to Derek's dishonesty. I realized his corruption extended far beyond stealing intellectual property. He was systematically defrauding the company through falsified expense reports. Rachel's information gave me another avenue for investigation, and I began tracking Derek's expense patterns alongside his theft of my work. The next piece of evidence came from Frank Morrison, our night janitor who had worked at TechFlow for over 15 years. Frank had earned a reputation as the company's unofficial chronicler, someone who noticed patterns and changes that escaped everyone else's attention. During one of my late-night work sessions, Frank approached my desk with his usual friendly demeanor. "You're working late again, Michelle. That boss of yours has been keeping some interesting hours himself," Frank said, emptying my wastebasket. "Most nights when I clean his office, I find copies of documents scattered around that don't seem to belong to him. Financial reports, strategy papers, that kind of thing. Always seemed odd to me that he'd be making copies of other people's work." Frank's observations confirmed my suspicions about Derek's methods. He wasn't just claiming credit during meetings, he was physically taking my documents, copying them, and using them as source material for his own presentations. This gave me a clear pattern of deliberate, premeditated theft rather than simple miscommunication or oversight. I began timing my departures to coincide with Derek's late-night activities. Twice I managed to retrieve documents from the copy machine that Derek had left behind, including drafts of presentations where he'd literally crossed out my name and replaced it with his own. These physical documents provided irrefutable proof of his systematic plagiarism. My investigation took on new urgency when I learned about Derek's relationship with senior leadership. He frequently name-dropped CEO Patricia Walsh in conversations implying that they had regular strategic discussions about company direction. However, when I discreetly inquired with Patricia's assistant during a routine meeting, I discovered that Derek had only met with Patricia twice in the past year, both times in large group settings. This pattern of exaggeration and false intimacy with leadership helped me understand Derek's broader strategy. He wasn't just stealing my work. He was constructing an entire false persona based on fabricated achievements and non-existent relationships. The more I dug, the more extensive his deceptions became. The most chilling discovery came when I found evidence that Derek had been accessing my computer files during my lunch breaks. Our IT system logged all file access, and I requested my usage reports under the pretense of tracking my own productivity. The logs showed that someone with supervisor-level access had been opening my project files during times when I was away from my desk. This violation felt deeply personal and invasive. Derek wasn't just taking credit for my completed work, he was actively monitoring my ongoing projects to steal ideas before I could even present them. I realized that every innovative thought, every strategic insight, and every creative solution I developed was being harvested by someone who viewed my intellectual contributions as his personal property. The climactic revelation of this period came when I discovered Derek's most sophisticated fraud yet. While researching his expense reports with Rachel's help, we uncovered a pattern of forged approval signatures on high-dollar expenditures. Derek had been falsifying Patricia Walsh's signature on documents authorizing expensive client entertainment conference attendance and equipment purchases. "Look at this," Rachel whispered, showing me photocopies of approval forms in her cramped accounting office. "These signatures don't match Patricia's actual handwriting. I compared them to documents I know she signed personally, and the differences are obvious once you look closely." The forged signatures represented a serious federal crime, transforming Derek's misconduct from workplace unethics into potential criminal activity. I realized that my evidence collection had uncovered something far more significant than intellectual property theft. I had documented a systematic pattern of fraud, forgery, and embezzlement that could result in criminal charges. That evening, I organized my evidence into a comprehensive dossier that told a clear story of escalating corruption. Financial fraud, intellectual property theft, document forgery, and character assassination painted a picture of someone who had completely abandoned professional integrity in favor of personal advancement. As I reviewed the mountain of evidence I'd accumulated, I knew that Derek had no idea how thoroughly he'd been exposed. Armed with overwhelming evidence of Derek's corruption, I faced the delicate challenge of approaching human resources without alerting Derek to my investigation. Sandra Peterson had always maintained a professional but approachable demeanor during company meetings, and I'd observed her handling sensitive employee situations with discretion and fairness. However, I needed to test her trustworthiness before revealing the full scope of what I'd discovered. I scheduled a routine meeting with Sandra under the pretense of discussing career development opportunities. Sitting in her organized office decorated with family photos and motivational posters, I carefully broached the subject of workplace concerns. "Sandra, I wanted to get your perspective on something that's been troubling me." I began choosing my words carefully. "I've noticed some inconsistencies in how credit is given for project contributions, and I'm not sure about the proper way to address this kind of situation." Sandra leaned forward with genuine interest, her experienced demeanor immediately shifting into problem-solving mode. "Michelle, I appreciate you coming to me with this. Can you give me some specific examples of what you've observed?" I shared carefully selected examples of Derek's intellectual property theft, watching Sandra's expression grow increasingly serious as I described the pattern of stolen ideas and misattributed work. Her response exceeded my expectations and confirmed my instincts about her integrity. "Michelle, what you're describing sounds like a serious violation of our intellectual property policies," Sandra said, pulling out a legal pad to take notes. "Between you and me, you're not the first person to raise concerns about Derek's management practices. I've been receiving complaints from multiple employees, but until now I haven't had concrete evidence to support an investigation." This revelation transformed my understanding of the situation entirely. Derek's misconduct wasn't an isolated pattern targeting only me. He had been systematically abusing his authority across the department. Sandra's willingness to discuss other complaints gave me confidence that she would take my evidence seriously. Over the following weeks, Sandra and I developed a careful strategy for documenting Derek's violations without alerting him to our investigation. She provided me with official incident report forms and helped me organize my evidence according to company policy requirements. Through these conversations, I learned about other victims of Derek's behavior. Katie Sullivan, a talented intern who had worked in our department during the summer, had apparently been subjected to inappropriate comments and unwanted advances from Derek. Sandra explained that Katie had been too intimidated to file a formal complaint, fearing that Derek's influence could damage her career prospects. Learning about Derek's harassment of a vulnerable young employee added another layer of urgency to my mission. The evidence collection intensified as I worked with Sandra to build an airtight case. We discovered that Derek's pattern of intellectual property theft extended to other team members, including a junior analyst named Marcus Thompson, whose innovative data visualization techniques had been appropriated for Derek's presentations to the board of directors. My investigation took a dangerous turn when Derek began displaying signs of suspicion about my activities. During a team meeting in early November, he questioned my need to access certain historical project files, suggesting that I should focus on current assignments rather than dwelling on past work. His tone carried an undercurrent of threat that made me realize how precarious my situation had become. The tension escalated when Derek demanded to review my laptop during a particularly aggressive performance evaluation session. He claimed that he needed to ensure I was using company resources appropriately, but I recognized this as an attempt to discover my evidence files. I managed to deflect his request by citing ongoing client confidentiality concerns, but I knew that my time was running short. Sandra and I accelerated our evidence compilation as Derek's behavior became increasingly erratic and controlling. Through careful coordination, we documented not only his financial fraud and intellectual property theft, but also his pattern of workplace harassment and intimidation tactics. The most shocking discovery came when Sandra revealed information from her broader investigation into Derek's activities. While reviewing his personnel file and cross-referencing it with other employee complaints, she discovered that Derek had been secretly recording private conversations with team members using his smartphone. These recordings contained embarrassing personal details that Derek could potentially use as leverage against anyone who challenged his authority. "Michelle, this is far more serious than we initially realized," Sandra said during one of our confidential meetings. Derek has created a systematic pattern of workplace abuse that includes financial fraud, intellectual property theft, sexual harassment, and now we have evidence of unauthorized surveillance. We're dealing with someone who has completely violated the trust and safety of this workplace. The scope of Derek's misconduct had grown beyond anything I'd imagined when I first began documenting his theft of my marketing strategies. Sandra explained that the company would need to involve federal authorities due to the financial fraud aspects of the case, transforming my workplace complaint into a potential criminal investigation. As we prepared to present our evidence to senior leadership, Derek's paranoia reached new levels. He began questioning other employees about my activities and suggesting that I might be engaged in inappropriate behavior myself. His attempts to preemptively discredit me confirmed that he sensed the walls closing in around him. The climactic moment of this phase came when Derek announced during a department meeting that he would be recommending me for immediate termination due to performance concerns and potential violations of company confidentiality policies. His accusation that I had been leaking company secrets to competitors was particularly ironic, given that our investigation had revealed his own involvement in precisely that kind of misconduct through his fraudulent activities. Sitting in that meeting and listening to Derek's lies, I felt a mixture of rage and satisfaction. He had no idea that every word he spoke was being carefully documented and that his attempt to destroy my reputation would ultimately serve as the final piece of evidence proving his unfitness for leadership. Derek's announcement about recommending my termination created an atmosphere of crisis that demanded immediate action. Sandra and I realized that we had run out of time for careful evidence gathering. Derek was moving to eliminate the primary threat to his continued fraud and abuse. The next few days would determine whether justice would prevail or whether Derek's corruption would claim another victim. The urgency increased when Derek called an unexpected department meeting to announce impending layoffs due to budget constraints and performance issues within the team. His presentation to the assembled staff painted a picture of financial pressures that required immediate cost-cutting measures. But Sandra's investigation had revealed that the company's financial position was actually stronger than it had been in years. Unfortunately, difficult economic conditions require us to make some tough decisions about staffing levels, Derek announced to the nervous group. We'll need to eliminate positions that aren't contributing maximum value to our strategic objectives. I realized that Derek's layoff announcement was actually a preemptive strike designed to remove anyone who might expose his criminal activity. By positioning himself as the company's cost-saving hero, he could eliminate witnesses to his fraud, while simultaneously enhancing his reputation with senior management. Sandra convened an emergency meeting with me that afternoon in a conference room far from Derek's office. The gravity of the situation was evident in her tense demeanor as she spread our evidence files across the table. "Michelle, we can't wait any longer. Derek is moving to fire you and potentially several other employees who could testify about his misconduct," Sandra said, organizing documents with practiced efficiency. "I'm scheduling an immediate presentation to Mark Thompson and Patricia Walsh tomorrow morning. We need to present everything we've discovered before Derek can eliminate the witnesses." That evening, I worked late in the office to complete final documentation while most of my colleagues had gone home. The floor was nearly empty, with only the distant hum of computers and the occasional security guard making rounds. I was focused on organizing financial evidence when I heard footsteps approaching my cubicle. Derek appeared around the partition with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of rage and desperation that made my heart race. His usually polished appearance was disheveled, his tie loosened, and his hair unkempt. He leaned against my desk with an aggressive posture that invaded my personal space. "Michelle, we need to talk," he said, his voice carrying a threatening undertone that made me grateful for the voice recording app I'd activated on my smartphone. "I know you've been asking questions about things that don't concern you, spreading rumors about my management style and stirring up trouble with other employees." I maintained calm eye contact while carefully positioning my phone to capture our conversation. "Derek, I'm not sure what you're referring to. I've been focused on my assigned projects and meeting all my deadlines." His laugh was bitter and menacing. "Don't play games with me. I know you've been talking to people going through files that aren't your business. You're making a very serious mistake if you think you can challenge me and win." The conversation that followed revealed Derek's true character in a way that no amount of evidence collection could have achieved. He threatened my career prospects, suggested that he could ensure I never found another job in the industry, and made vaguely personal threats about the consequences of causing trouble for people who have the power to destroy you. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," Derek continued, his voice rising with each word. "I have relationships throughout this industry, and I can make sure that every potential employer knows exactly what kind of disloyal, troublemaking employee you really are. Your career will be over before you know what hit you." I let him continue threatening me while my phone captured every word of his intimidation tactics. His arrogance had reached such levels that he was essentially confessing to witness intimidation and abuse of authority. When he finally finished his threatening monologue and stormed away, I had recorded nearly 20 minutes of criminal behavior. The next morning brought the confrontation I'd been preparing for over 6 months. Sandra arranged for Mark Thompson, Patricia Walsh, and the company's legal counsel to meet in the executive conference room at 9 o'clock. Derek had no idea that he was walking into a carefully orchestrated trap that would expose his criminal activities and end his reign of workplace terrorism. I arrived early and helped Sandra organize our evidence presentation on the conference room's large display screen. Financial documents, email chains, recorded conversations, and witness statements told a comprehensive story of systematic fraud and abuse that spanned nearly 2 years of Derek's employment. Mark Thompson entered the conference room with Derek close behind both men, expecting a routine administrative meeting. Derek's confident demeanor and casual conversation with Mark demonstrated his complete lack of awareness about what was about to unfold. "Good morning, everyone," Mark said, settling into his chair at the head of the table. "Sandra mentioned some personnel issues that needed immediate attention. Derek, I understand there are some performance concerns with team members that we need to address." Derek launched into his prepared presentation about my supposed deficiencies and security risks, completely unaware that every accusation he made was being contradicted by evidence displayed on screens behind him. His confidence was absolute as he recommended my immediate termination and suggested that other layoffs might be necessary to protect company interests. The climactic moment came when Patricia Walsh interrupted Derek's presentation with a question that changed everything. "Derek, before we proceed with personnel decisions, I'd like you to help me understand some discrepancies that Sandra has brought to my attention. Can you explain why your expense reports show client dinners on dates when those clients were confirmed to be out of the country?" Derek's expression shifted from confidence to confusion as he processed Patricia's question. The transformation was visible as he realized that his carefully constructed deceptions had been discovered and documented. His attempt to respond devolved into stammering excuses that only served to further incriminate him. What followed was the most satisfying professional moment of my life, as years of abuse, theft, and intimidation finally received the consequences they deserved. The morning of December 15th started like any other workday, but I knew it would end with Derek's professional destruction. Walking into the office on my 32nd birthday, I could feel the unusual tension in the air as colleagues exchanged nervous glances and whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when I approached their desks. Sarah from graphic design managed only a weak smile when she wished me happy birthday, and even James seemed unusually subdued during our brief conversation at the coffee machine. The entire office atmosphere felt charged with anticipation, as if everyone sensed that something significant was about to happen. Derek's behavior was particularly telling. Instead of his usual dismissive attitude toward my presence, he seemed almost eager to interact with me. His false cheerfulness was so transparent that I wondered how I'd ever been intimidated by someone whose deception skills were so obviously inadequate. "Good morning, Michelle," he said with exaggerated warmth as I settled at my desk. "Happy birthday. I hope you're ready for a memorable day." The irony of his words wasn't lost on me as I responded with equal false enthusiasm. "Thank you, Derek. I have a feeling this birthday will be one I'll never forget." Around 10:30, Derek appeared at my cubicle with theatrical importance, holding a manila folder that I knew contained termination paperwork. His attempt to project authority was undermined by the nervous energy I could see in his fidgeting hands and forced smile. "Michelle, I need to see you in conference room B for a few minutes. There are some administrative matters we need to discuss," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone supervisors use when they're about to deliver bad news. I followed him into the glass-walled conference room, noting how our colleagues pretended to focus on their work while obviously monitoring our interaction. The fluorescent lighting cast harsh shadows across Derek's face as he arranged his paperwork with unnecessary ceremony. "Please have a seat," Derek said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I'm afraid I have some difficult news to share with you today." I sat down calmly, placing my purse containing months of evidence documentation in my lap, and waited for Derek to begin his performance. His preparation was almost comical as he straightened his tie, cleared his throat, and assumed what he probably thought was an authoritative posture. "Michelle, after careful consideration of your performance over the past several months, I've made the difficult decision to terminate your employment with TechFlow Innovations," Derek announced with practiced solemnity. "Your work hasn't met the standards we require for this position, and there have been concerns about your ability to collaborate effectively with team members." I maintained neutral eye contact as he delivered his scripted explanation, noting how his accusations directly contradicted my documented performance reviews and positive feedback from colleagues. His confidence was absolute as he outlined the supposed deficiencies that justified my termination. Then came the moment I'd been anticipating for weeks, Derek's attempt to deliver the psychological blow that would complete my humiliation and demonstrate his absolute power over my professional fate. "I want you to understand that this decision wasn't made lightly," Derek continued, his voice taking on a tone of mock sympathy. "In fact, since today is your birthday, I'm going to be completely honest with you. Consider this a gift you're fired. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to someone is being freed from a position where they're clearly struggling to succeed." The cruelty of his delivery was exactly what I'd expected from someone who had spent months systematically stealing my work and undermining my reputation. His obvious satisfaction at timing my termination to coincide with my birthday revealed the depth of his vindictive character. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear or devastation, but from the effort required to contain my excitement about what was about to unfold. I smiled back at Derek, knowing that every word of his termination speech was being documented as evidence of his abusive management style. "Derek, I appreciate your honesty," I replied calmly. "And I want you to know that I'm not surprised by this decision. In fact, I've been preparing for this conversation for quite some time." Derek's expression shifted slightly as he processed my unexpected response. He had clearly anticipated tears, pleas for reconsideration, or angry outbursts that would confirm his narrative about my supposed instability. My calm acceptance wasn't part of his script. "I'm glad you're taking this professionally," Derek said, though his tone suggested confusion about my reaction. "Human Resources has prepared your final paperwork, and security will escort you out after you've gathered your personal belongings." At that moment, Sandra Peterson appeared in the conference room doorway with an expression that immediately caught Derek's attention. Her professional demeanor carried an undercurrent of urgency that suggested something important was happening. "Derek, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Mark Thompson needs to see you in his office immediately," Sandra announced, her voice carefully neutral. "He asked me to tell you it's extremely urgent and can't wait." Derek's confusion was evident as he processed this unexpected summons. "Can it wait 30 minutes? I'm in the middle of handling a personnel matter with Michelle." "I'm afraid not," Sandra replied firmly. "Mark specifically said you needed to come immediately, and he asked me to escort you there personally. He mentioned that legal counsel and other department heads would be joining the meeting." The mention of legal counsel caused Derek's confident demeanor to crack slightly. I could see him trying to process why his meeting with Mark would require legal representation, especially during what should have been a routine termination conversation. "Michelle will need to continue this discussion later," Derek said, gathering his termination paperwork with slightly less authority than he'd displayed moments earlier. "Wait here until I return." As Derek followed Sandra out of the conference room, I allowed myself a moment of pure satisfaction. After months of careful planning and evidence collection, the trap had been set, and Derek was walking directly into the consequences of his criminal behavior. Through the glass walls, I could see Derek's confident stride gradually transform into nervous urgency as he processed the implications of an unexpected meeting with senior leadership and legal counsel. His termination of me had been intended as his moment of absolute triumph, but instead, it had become the trigger for his own professional destruction. The next few minutes would determine whether Derek's reign of fraud, theft, and abuse would continue, or whether justice would finally be served for all the employees he had victimized. Derek's confident stride toward Mark Thompson's office gradually transformed into hesitant steps as he processed the implications of legal counsel's involvement in what should have been a routine supervisory meeting. I watched through the conference room's glass walls as his posture shifted from authoritative swagger to visible anxiety. Within minutes, the entire office dynamic changed, as word spread that Derek had been summoned to an emergency meeting with senior leadership. Colleagues exchanged meaningful glances while pretending to focus on their work, and the usual background noise of phone calls and keyboard typing was replaced by an expectant silence that filled the open floor plan. Tom Bradley, our company's security chief, appeared near Mark's office suite, his presence adding another layer of seriousness to the unfolding situation. Tom's 20-year background in corporate investigation and his reputation for handling sensitive personnel matters signaled that this meeting involved more than routine administrative concerns. The sound of raised voices began echoing from the executive corridor around 11:15, with Derek's distinctive tone rising above the others in what appeared to be increasingly desperate explanations. His voice carried through the office space, creating an uncomfortable atmosphere as employees tried to ignore the obvious confrontation taking place behind closed doors. "That's completely untrue. Michelle has been spreading malicious rumors about my management style because she's angry about receiving negative performance feedback." Derek's voice echoed down the hallway, his words audible to anyone working in the nearby cubicles. The irony wasn't lost on me, as Derek's attempts to defend himself against charges of intellectual property theft and financial fraud devolved into character assassination attempts against the very person whose evidence had exposed his criminal behavior. His desperation was becoming more obvious with each defensive outburst. Patricia Walsh's voice, though quieter than Derek's, carried an unmistakable tone of authority and disapproval as she apparently confronted him with specific examples of his misconduct. While I couldn't make out her exact words, her measured cadence suggested she was methodically presenting evidence that Derek couldn't dispute or explain away. The confrontation intensified around 11:30 when Sandra emerged from the executive suite with a folder of documents and headed toward the Human Resources Department. Her purposeful demeanor and the serious expressions of the security personnel accompanying her suggested that Derek's situation had escalated beyond internal disciplinary action. James Rodriguez approached my desk with unconcealed curiosity about the commotion that had consumed everyone's attention. His usual casual demeanor was replaced by obvious concern about the implications of Derek's emergency meeting. "Michelle, do you know what's happening with Derek? The whole office is buzzing with rumors about some kind of investigation," James whispered, glancing toward the executive corridor, where Derek's voice continued to echo intermittently. I maintained neutral composure, while privately savoring the satisfaction of watching months of careful planning reach their inevitable conclusion. I'm sure it's just routine administrative business, James. These things always seem more dramatic than they actually are. The climactic moment came when Derek's voice rose to a level that carried clearly throughout the office space, his words revealing the depth of his panic as he realized the scope of evidence being presented against him. This is obviously a coordinated attack by disgruntled employees who are trying to undermine my leadership. Michelle has been collecting false information and manipulating other staff members to support her baseless accusations. His attempt to characterize months of documented evidence as a conspiracy theory demonstrated both his desperation and his fundamental misunderstanding of the situation he faced. The accusation that I had somehow manipulated financial records, forged expense reports, and fabricated recordings of his own voice was so absurd that it only served to further incriminate him. The office atmosphere reached a breaking point when Tom Bradley appeared at Derek's office and began removing items from his desk, while Derek remained trapped in his meeting with senior leadership. The sight of security personnel securing Derek's computer files and personal belongings sent a clear message about the seriousness of whatever charges he was facing. Around 12:15, Sandra returned to the main office area and began drafting what appeared to be an important company-wide communication. Her coordination with legal counsel and the deliberate nature of her actions suggested that Derek's situation was about to become public knowledge for the entire organization. The explosion finally came at 12:30 when Sandra's company-wide email arrived in everyone's inbox simultaneously. The subject line read, "Important personnel update, effective immediately," and the content confirmed what everyone had been suspecting throughout the morning's drama. "Dear TechFlow team," the email began, "following a comprehensive internal investigation, Derek Hamilton's employment with TechFlow Innovations has been terminated effective immediately due to serious violations of company policy and professional conduct standards." The email continued, "Michelle Johnson has been reinstated to full employment status and will be assuming expanded responsibilities within the marketing department. We appreciate her dedication to maintaining the highest standards of professional integrity during this difficult period." The vindication was absolute and public, confirming to my colleagues that my termination had been reversed and that Derek's accusations against me had been thoroughly disproven. The email's language about serious violations and professional conduct standards suggested that Derek's misconduct extended far beyond simple workplace disagreements. Within minutes of the email's distribution, the office atmosphere transformed from nervous tension to barely contained excitement as employees processed the implications of Derek's sudden termination. Conversations erupted at workstations throughout the floor as colleagues shared their own experiences with Derek's problematic management style. The final dramatic moment came when Derek emerged from Mark's office, accompanied by Tom Bradley and Sandra, his face pale and his confident demeanor completely shattered. The sight of him being escorted through the office space by security personnel, while his former subordinates watched from their desks, represented the complete collapse of his authority and reputation. Derek's attempts to maintain dignity during his escort from the building were undermined by his obvious emotional distress and the humiliating nature of his public termination. Colleagues who had previously feared his retaliation now watched with a mixture of satisfaction and sympathy as his career imploded in real time. The most satisfying moment of the entire ordeal came when two federal investigators arrived in the parking lot and approached Derek as Tom Bradley finished escorting him to his vehicle. The sight of law enforcement personnel engaging Derek in serious conversation confirmed that his misconduct had crossed the threshold from workplace violations to potential criminal activity. As I watched through the office windows, Derek's girlfriend arrived in a separate vehicle and immediately began what appeared to be a frantic attempt to remove documents and equipment from Derek's car. Her obvious panic and the investigators' immediate interest in her activities suggested that Derek's criminal behavior had extended beyond individual misconduct to involve additional conspirators. The day that had begun with Derek's cruel termination of me on my birthday had transformed into his own professional and legal destruction, providing a level of poetic justice that exceeded even my most optimistic expectations for accountability and consequences. 3 months later, sitting in my newly renovated office, with its view of the Portland city skyline. I reflected on the remarkable transformation that had followed Derek's spectacular downfall. The corner office that had once been his now served as my base of operations as TechFlow's new Director of Marketing Innovation, a position created specifically to harness the creative energy that Derek had spent so much effort trying to suppress. The legal proceedings against Derek had unfolded exactly as federal investigators had predicted. The evidence Sandra and I compiled, combined with additional discoveries made during the FBI's forensic examination of his computers and financial records, resulted in multiple felony charges for embezzlement, wire fraud, and identity theft. Derek's attempts to plea bargain were rejected by prosecutors who viewed his case as an opportunity to send a clear message about corporate accountability. Derek's trial had concluded the previous week with guilty verdicts on all counts, resulting in a sentence of 6 years in federal prison and restitution payments totaling over $200,000. His professional reputation was so thoroughly destroyed that even his defense attorney acknowledged during sentencing that Derek would likely never work in a supervisory capacity again. The revelation about Derek's girlfriend's role in industrial espionage had provided the most shocking twist in an already dramatic case. FBI investigators discovered that she had been systematically photographing confidential documents and selling proprietary information to TechFlow's primary competitor for over 18 months. Her arrest in the parking lot while attempting to destroy evidence led to additional conspiracy charges and a separate federal prosecution. The impact on company culture had been immediate and profound. Employees who had previously been afraid to report problems or suggest improvements now felt empowered to contribute their ideas without fear of retaliation or theft. The atmosphere of paranoia and competition that Derek had cultivated was replaced by collaborative teamwork and mutual support. Katie Sullivan had returned to TechFlow as a full-time marketing coordinator after completing her degree, bringing fresh perspectives and innovative approaches that Derek's presence had previously stifled. Her confidence and creativity flourished in an environment where harassment and intimidation were no longer tolerated, and her contributions to our social media strategy had already resulted in measurable improvements to customer engagement. Rachel Martinez had been promoted to senior financial analyst after her role in exposing Derek's expense report fraud was recognized by senior management. Her attention to detail and ethical courage had prevented thousands of dollars in additional theft, and her new position included responsibility for implementing enhanced financial controls throughout the organization. Frank Morrison, our longtime janitor, whose observations had provided crucial evidence about Derek's document theft, received a commendation from Patricia Walsh and a substantial bonus for his role in protecting company assets. His informal network of information throughout the building had been formalized into a security reporting system that helped maintain workplace safety and integrity. The transformation extended beyond individual personnel changes to fundamental shifts in company policies and procedures. Patricia Walsh had implemented comprehensive training programs about workplace harassment, intellectual property protection, and ethical leadership that had become a model for other organizations in our industry. My own professional growth had exceeded every expectation I'd harbored during those dark months when Derek was systematically stealing my work and undermining my reputation. The marketing campaigns I'd developed were now being implemented without interference, and the results had exceeded all projected benchmarks for customer acquisition and engagement. The innovative cross-platform strategy that Derek had stolen and claimed as his own was now generating industry recognition for TechFlow, with my approaches being featured in marketing publications and conference presentations. The irony that Derek's theft had actually prevented me from receiving credit for work that was now being celebrated nationally wasn't lost on me. More importantly, the experience had taught me valuable lessons about standing up for principles and fighting injustice, even when the personal costs seemed overwhelming. The months of evidence collection and the stress of confronting a powerful supervisor had been difficult, but the ultimate vindication had been worth every sleepless night and anxious moment. I'd begun volunteering with a local nonprofit organization that provided support and advocacy for employees experiencing workplace harassment and discrimination. My experience with Derek's systematic abuse had given me insights that helped other victims navigate similar situations with confidence and strategic thinking. The ripple effects of Derek's prosecution had extended throughout our industry, with other companies implementing enhanced oversight procedures and ethics training programs designed to prevent similar abuses. Several employees at competing organizations had come forward with their own stories about supervisory misconduct, citing our case as inspiration for their own pursuit of justice. Derek's attempts to find new employment had been consistently unsuccessful, as his criminal conviction and professional reputation preceded him in every application process. His LinkedIn profile, once filled with stolen accomplishments and fabricated achievements, had been permanently suspended after multiple reports from former colleagues and industry contacts. The personal satisfaction of seeing justice served had been profound, but the broader impact on workplace culture and employee empowerment had been even more meaningful. The message that no supervisor, regardless of their position or influence, was above accountability had resonated throughout our organization and beyond. As I concluded my reflection on this remarkable journey from victimization to vindication, I realized that Derek's cruel characterization of my termination as a birthday gift had inadvertently proven prophetic. By firing me on my birthday, he had triggered the investigation that exposed his criminal behavior and ultimately freed not just me, but all of TechFlow's employees from his toxic leadership. The greatest gift hadn't been my termination. It had been the opportunity to prove that integrity, persistence, and careful documentation could triumph over corruption, abuse, and intimidation. The experience had transformed me from a victim of workplace abuse into an advocate for justice and a leader capable of creating positive change. Looking ahead, I felt confident that the skills I developed during those challenging months would serve me well in future leadership roles and continue to benefit the colleagues and employees who depended on ethical leadership and fair treatment. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where someone in power was taking advantage of their position to harm others? How did you find the courage to stand up for what was right? And what advice would you give to someone facing similar workplace injustice? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video to help others who might be facing similar challenges find the inspiration and guidance they need. Subscribe to our channel for more stories about overcoming adversity and fighting for justice in everyday situations. And please share this with anyone who might benefit from knowing that they're not alone in their struggles against workplace abuse and corruption. Thank you for joining me on this journey from betrayal to triumph. Remember that your voice matters, your integrity has value, and sometimes the most difficult battles lead to the most meaningful victories. Until next time, keep fighting for what's right, and never let anyone convince you that injustice is just part of the job.